Standardized testing has been around for a very long time and is something that continues to be highly controversial in the education system today. Standardized testing was started in the United States in the mid-1800s. According to Andrew P. Huddleston in the article Assessments for the Masses, a historical critique of high stakes in testing and reading, before standardized testing, the students were tested orally. Since education was more individualized, teachers would take the time to listen to each individual student, read something out loud, and recite certain things from memory to determine their progress and success. In 1845, Horace Mann believed standardized written essay exams were the best and most efficient ways to assess students because of how enrollment in schools were increasing. According to Times article entitled Standardized Testing, author Dan Fletcher explains that standardized testing trends continued when in 1905 the first IQ and achievement test was created by Alfred Binet and carried out in France, which was eventually brought and used in the United States as well. Many changes were made as a result of standardized testing in the U.S. In 2002, George W. Bush established the No Child Left Behind Act. The No Child Left Behind Act held every school accountable for its students' academic achievement. The author, Andrew Huddleston, goes on to explain that in 2009, the idea of Common Core standards was introduced. Currently, 43 states have adopted the Common Core standards in the United States. As part of the Common Core standards, the assessment of readiness of college and careers, or PARCC testing, is given to students on a computer and asks students to complete tasks rather than completing multiple choice questions. Overall, throughout time, standardized testing has changed and is something that continues to be changed as time goes on.
Although there are a lot of cons for standardized testing, there are a few pros that make it worthwhile. In an article by Robert State called The Teacher Standardized Testing and Prospects of Revolution, they discuss that it is not difficult for a state or a union to assign these standards. These standards are used as a tool for teachers to create curriculum, create tests, and select textbooks in order to follow state and nation standards. These are critical for teachers to teach relevant content. It is easy as educators and board and political members to assign these standards. It is implicating them that is the struggle. Students should have these standard guidelines in place for educators to follow so their teachers aren't giving lessons on things that aren't necessary. Although there are some positives, there are actually a lot more negative consequences to standardized testing. It is frequently said that teachers teach to test, not to what students need. Educators face constant pressures for their students to achieve highly on standardized tests because their schools depend on it. In Bhattacharya and Clark's academic journal called Can You Hear Us? Voices Raised Against Standardized Testing by Novice Teachers, they talk about one of the major problems with standardized test scores is that they dictate so much within a school and a district. As certain schools and districts constantly score lowly, they're at risk of being shut down or even teachers losing their jobs. This forces teachers to teach to a test and not to their students' needs. This forces teachers to be at a crossroads between teaching relevant information and teaching to the curriculum. Another struggle of standardized testing is that English language learners are at an unfair advantage while being tested because they are not being tested on their knowledge and comprehension, they are being tested on how well they know English. It is nearly impossible for students who can barely read English to be tested in a foreign language on what they've learned. In a research study by Deborah Hoffman called A Study of Relationships Between Ethnicity and Gender in Standardized Testing, not only are standardized tests unfair for monolingual learners, it is even more unfair assessment for those who are English language learners. If these tests don't make any sense, it's because they don't fully grasp English. It will not test what knowledge they have. There's also a huge lack of cultural relevance within these tests.
The standardized testing issue is important because it affects the schooling of the students and the jobs of their teachers. It also affects the schools that they attend and the educational policies that affects everyone. In Joanne L. Herman and Sherry Golan's article, The Effects of Standardized Testing on Teaching in Schools, they discuss this idea that standardized testing continues to play a huge role in educational policies. These policies are made in an effort to improve the quality of education. The value of standardized tests continues to be a large subject of debate, and due to this, the quality of the student's education is constantly being altered. The state and federal government are finally taking steps in the right direction to making standardized tests fair and more effective in the public schools. In Valerie Strauss's article, How Testing Practices Have to Change in U.S. Public Schools, she explains how there have been some progress made in the last year or so as state and federal officials finally begin to realize that these issues being brought up by parents, educators, students, and activists, the people who have protested the excessive and harmful use of high-stakes standardized tests, have reasons to why.
Next, it's also important to discuss how standardized testing affects our students and their education. Frank Omeg and Elise McCall Thomas questioned the dependability of standardized testing in their academic journal, Performance Management and Undesirable Organizational Behavior, written in 2013. In this article, they note many of the limitations and consequences of such testing and how it affects students. They state, it does not reflect everything a student has learned. The tests are often short answer and multiple choice, and thus biased towards certain kinds of learning. Reflecting this on our educational courses, I see a discrepancy. We are taught to differentiate our lessons to provide different learning styles for our students. But then if we hand them a standardized test that has one correct answer on multiple choice, and perhaps short answers that are biased, this does not accurately represent the academic status that they have. The effect on students become frustrated. They have anxiety towards these tests and develop bad connotations towards testing and perhaps education itself. As for the future of standardized testing, Yar Farrar, in her 2013 article Through Another's Eyes, discusses where the future for standardized testing falls. She states it falls in the hands of those who care to see a difference, such as educators, parents, students. All of these individuals who understand that standardized testing does not represent our teachers or our students accurately should stand up and keep discussing how standardized testing isn't an accurate representation of our current educational system. If we stand up, she believes that in just a few years, the future of standardized testing may be no more. But this means that we will have to develop another way to represent what schools are doing, teachers are doing, and what students are doing.